shut down our... And there we are, starting the show. Clickety-clack, clickety-clack. Don't have sound effects yet. There's Peter's opening logo stuff. Troubles in Paradise. And everyone remember typewriters and non-digital clocks? How extraordinary. And there is Troubles in Paradise, tortuganwordpress.com, my website, which I keep on reminding everybody to pay attention to, and that doesn't seem to care about anything. So there's our opening share. Let me close my thing off because I want to keep my news going without too much of a panic. We have some guests, Jackson and Cap today, and we will be having a delightful time, hopefully, exploring, continuing the world of my source methods analysis on contested bones, which reveals all the information that they don't seem to pay attention to on their creationist view of things, and then some other stuff on you, Ross, and Denise O'Leary a little bit later on. As you are well aware from the last few weeks, because I've been labeling the damn things, the Contested Bones series, I was given this book, Contested Bones, by Christopher Ruppy and John Sanford, who are two young Earth creationists, although they're coy about revealing that. And they're going on about human evolution, which anybody who has ever seen Answers in Genesis apologetics or Institute for Creation Research apologetics or Kent Hovind apologetics, you already know the drill. You know what they're going to argue, then you know the arguments they're making. And they're going through the physical taxa. They finally, the last section's all been on the Flores man, the little Hobbit, these strangely small-brained, what are they, living on this little island in Indonesia down to about 20, 30,000 years ago and starting maybe 700,000 years ago. And it's been a fascinating problem for paleoanthropologists to figure out where they fit in on things. Are they some weird microcephalic human being? Are they just a dwarf version of some Homo erectus that got there by rafting across or being hit by a tsunami? How exactly did they get there? And there's still a lot of open questions about it. But the question that ain't open is, no, they apparently aren't weird mutant humans. They are, in fact, closer to some branch of Homo erectus. Whether they're a separate species or not still is a matter of legitimate debate. But what I found repeatedly in Ruppy and Sanford is they don't allow that option, or rather they misrepresent the option. They will routinely say, oh, here's a paper, and they're saying that they're a variety of Homo erectus, parentheses, i.e. humans. And so they're slipping that in. But the one thing that we can see is, no, they aren't. They're falling outside of the range in terms of their physical anatomy, in terms of their brain structure and all the rest. They're almost, but not close enough to qualify as actually humans. And so I put a reference up. One of the last bits they referenced was this 2017 paper that had just appeared when they were working on it. It's open access from PLOS One, I think. And so you can read, it's about some new finds on that island that are not the older ones. These are newer fossils, and they're Floriensis-like. And they found some more tools and the like, which are all fitting in with this very primitive man or Homo, not human beings, or genus. And so I put it up as a link so everyone can take a look at it, because it's a fun one. Nice paper, good material. I recommend Ruppy and Sanford read it sometime because...
Wait. You don't think they're actually going to try and read something that will disprove them and then they have to lie out their butt, do you?
All they want are the authority quotes. And the thing is that when you read the original material, which I've been doing and linking you to, going out of my way saying, look at this, read the original material, you can see how they're parsing their way through. Invariably, another one that I was up quite a bit late on for the last couple of days, this old 2009 book, perfectly fine book, but it does from 2009, which means all of its comments are pending future research that has come along since 2009. But it was a very detailed book. By some paleoanthropologists, and there's been some authority quoting from it where they invariably leave out all the parts that don't fit their model. So I fortunately, an awful lot of the book was available. I can give you the name of it. It's Cartmill and Smith, The Human Lineage, from 2009, and fortunately big chunks of it are available online in the previews at Amazon, and that's what I've been going through, because most of the quotes that they have pulled up are in segments that I could actually see the original text. And so I've been manually typing in the full text of the material. In this one case, they authority quoted a little snippet on they're in the new section, they're getting to Australopithecines, and that the Australopithecines are just quadrupedal chimpanzee-like, and that they like that opinion from it. Well, that was one of the options that was being put forward as possible explanations for the data. And in fact, the section was very meticulous in analyzing why that was an oversimplification. And so they're cherry picking again.
So you mean to tell me a creationist is dishonest?
I don't call them dishonest. I call them Tortukans. They don't need to be dishonest to be a Tortukan. They just have a brain. Oh, jump in, Jackson.
There had been facultative bipedality going all the way back to Oren and Ardipithecus, hadn't there?
Yeah, which weren't known in 2009 era. This has been like in the decade since. So this was why authority quoting an older work is in principle dicey, because you're talking about that frequently on this Homo floresiensis matter, floresiensis, got an S in there, is that they would be citing material on the original fossil that was found in the early 2000s and not paying attention to the work done on the specimens since then, like this new pending paper. Science moves on, and you try to make the sense you can of the blips on the scope at the time, but you get more blips. And to pretend that the blips aren't there and to write authority quoting and snatching material as if everything was cast in concrete, this is, in part, I can understand why the Rupi and Sanford mind will do this, because they're coming often from a religious perspective. And religious apologetics is proof texting. This is something that goes deep ingrained into Christian apologetics, where thus saith Isaiah, chapter 4, thus saith Dwayne Gish, thus saith Stephen Jay Gould. And so everything becomes authority quotes that are proof texts that you can then trot out, and it doesn't have any context. It doesn't have any chronology. Well, that's the opposite of real science and real scholarship. I don't care what somebody wrote in 2004. If data came along in 2012 that renders it irrelevant or puts it into fresher context, look at the newer material. Don't pay attention to the old quote, other than being an antiquarian, where you want to look at how the view of the fossil has changed over time because of how different people get different information. That's perfectly fine to do. But they're not playing antiquarians. No, they're playing trawlers. And that's a very different kettle of fish. But on that issue of dishonesty, once in a while, David Lass says in there that Tortukans sound like people who are satisfied with making statements about subjects with less than the full scale of the data on the subject. Oh boy, is that true?
I think that's. Did he steal that word right out of the RJ dictionary? That definition?
It serves quite nicely. Well, it's not that that's a defining characteristic of the Tortukan, but it's a manifestation of it. Tortukan minds, and we're talking turtle brains, you know, they've got the impenetrable mind shell and things just bounce right off of it. It's very easy for them to deal with limited data fields. They're addicted to secondary source citation. They get material from a limited data field. They're looking for authority quotes. They're looking for confirmation bias stuff, and then their brain shuts down. So most of the time, they're not being, air quotes, dishonest, although there are specific instances, particularly those telltale ... dots. Everybody pay attention to ellipses when you're dealing with quotations from people, because the ... a fair excision is one that does not remove any relevant information. That is simply a condensation that wants to get the point across, and it's doing justice to the original source. But you'll find Tortukans don't use ... dots that way.
Yeah.
And sometimes the ... can be revealing, because they are removing relevant information that you only know when you read the original material. If they do that, now they've moved from just being a Tortukan confirmation bias person to somebody who's being disingenuous and dishonest. And I've seen that happen. It's relatively rare, because general Tortukanosity is more than capable of accounting for the behavior without them being conscious. Because what they do is they come across the thing they want to be true, and they, oh, there it is, there's my ammo. And they don't bother reading the rest of the text.
Yeah. I think it's kind of interesting to see, like, when you read their material and they go from having the quote with the ellipses to having the quote without the ellipses, like the Derek, there's the Derek Ager quote that floats around frequently on in creationist circles, and sometimes you'll see it with the ellipses, sometimes without.
Yeah, well, that's where you're looking at the systematics of their quote mine. And that's why sometimes, that's how I identified a couple of weeks ago, Kent Hovind and Harun Yahya, because he made the mistake of copying exactly. And I could find out PowerPoint slide after PowerPoint slide after PowerPoint slide that this was direct verbatim copying from a very specific text, which was a Harun Yahya posting. So those little ellipses and the way things are phrased, where brackets are placed, excisions, all the little fiddly bit details, sometimes the citation, if they give the citation or fail to give the citation, inconsistencies in citation is always a suspicious thing. And is an indication that they may be a parasitical citer. Because if they're citing Science, the magazine Science, and sometimes they're giving the volume number, and sometimes they're giving the date rather than the volume number, and sometimes they're putting in all the authors, and sometimes they're doing an et al, and then sometimes they're putting in the full title, and sometimes not. Why? If you're a scholar, don't you want to standardize your approach? And if you're reading the original material on your own, you would be standardizing it according to your method.
That's what
they're nicking it from multiple sources.
That's what RJ, that we do for my scripts, my video scripts, is I always do is such and such date, paper, and then the name.
Yeah, you have a standard procedure. I have a different standard procedure. Yeah. And anybody who was nicking stuff from either one of us might very easily be copying our separate formats. But no legitimate scholar is going to be doing that. They're going to standardize everything. And it forces you to look at the original material too. Go ahead, Cap.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know with my citing in the one video, both you and Jackson helped me out with a while back, about a month ago, I think is when I posted it. I said it, like when I had my script, I said, this according to such and such, and I gave where my citation was. And then in the description, you don't even need to look for where, you don't even need to go, oh, is this and such? Okay. Oh, hey, hyperlink, click. And there you go. It'll take you directly what I was reading.
Yeah, what you can do in that context. For written material, it's a different thing. What I do in my main bibliography is anal retentive but necessary, in that I provide all the relevant information. So I want to know every single author. There was a recent paper on the genetics underlying brain malfunctions in diseases, various mental disorders. And it was done by this mammoth consortium, the Brainstorm Consortium. And there were like 300 authors on it. Holy shit. And I had to put in every bloody one of them because in my master bibliography, I want to know who all those authors are, because now I know who the scientists are doing the work. Also, I put the full title of the material and the full volume and the date and all the full page number range. I want as much information as possible so that anyone can find that information using any of those cues by Google searching or anything else.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I might not, like, if it was 300 authors, I might put like the first 3 names of the author. If I was doing like a paper and I was citing something and there was like 300, I would probably put like the first 3 and then that's where I would stop. But I would give the name, the date, the publication, what page it was on. If I have the page, I mean, any information, because I had in high school, I had a very anal retentive English teacher. And literally, she would mark you off if you were missing any information. Like if she could find more information on the source that you didn't cite using your source, you got points taken off because you didn't cite it properly.
It's a method that you find along, and the one of the cardinal rules of sound scholarship that got drummed into me during college that I hadn't really ingrained when I was only in high school has to do with all of that source approach and not to confuse primary and secondary sources. That ideally, and of course I act as a terrible influence on Jackson as well, because I insist that he go as much as possible to primary source information. And on my citation, I want to have the volume data and stuff, whereas he is often drawing off of it with a interweb link, which of course for a book purpose won't be useful at all. So I track down what the original material is so I can put it into book format.
I know because of you, actually just talking with you the few times on movie night and listening to Evolution Hour the few times, I very much I've started, if someone cites something, I'm finding the original source if I can. If you post an article that mentions a study, I'm scouring that article. Go to that,
and for one thing too, when you read a secondary source, a commentary or something, go to the original material, because what you're doing is measuring their reliability. You're
Yeah.
measuring how good they are at describing this. Are they leaving information out themselves? And so you can start gauging how good of a secondary coverage those secondary sources are. And you find some are very good and others are a little bit looser. And a lot of newspaper accounts and stuff, they want to put headlines that are more inflammatory. I want to say a little shout out to David there. Who says usually works Wednesdays. It's a rare occasion for me to watch an evolution hour from beginning to end while it's live. Well, welcome to the show. Thank you could make it this time, and hope you enjoy all the things. That I hope to ingrain in everybody what sounds like boring source citation issues. Oh, that's so dreary and all that, but it reflects an underlying method. And the rigor of recognizing if you're dealing with a primary source claim or whether you're dealing with somebody's opinion about a primary source claim, or worse, somebody's opinion about a primary source claim.
Oh, yeah.
And you'll find that people who can easily confuse those levels and not bother to look it up to find out whether it's actually true, those tend to be Tortugan minds. And they may not need to be dishonest about it. They'll get the little thing that says what they want to be true, and they'll copy it down very slavishly. Jackson and I have all spotted things where they've been so diligent in copying the wrong information down accurately. And they never find out that with Matt Powell and his Robert Carroll quote. That's not a Robert Carroll quote. He got it from a creationist website that was inaccurate to begin with. Henry Morris had misquoted it, misrepresented it. That was put on some website, and then Matt Powell copies it. And what was so pathetic about it is the original text, the whole bloody book, was available free online as a downloadable PDF.
Yeah, I think it gets worse because the quote was that there are no transitions between amphibians and amphibians and tetrapods, but there's an entire chapter literally on the transition from fish to tetrapods. So,
and the book was from way back in, I think, 1992 or 1981, something like that. It's an older book.
80s, wasn't it?
And the thing is that there's been work since then. But when you can't even represent the quote originally from that decade and then not follow through on the material since, that's what makes Matt so lame, is that he has no excuse whatsoever for have got this wrong. He must never have taken the fundamental step of checking out the original material. Wouldn't you want to see the original material? And especially since we knew already the entire book was available for him to get at, there was nothing except laziness that kept him from finding that stuff. I'm pissed off on this.
Oh, yeah, no, it's absolutely one of the things, because I made notes and I showed it to you, RJ, and a few other people. For my discussion that I had with him, one of the things I wanted to bring up was just the list of transitional forms he had in his book, like Osteolepis, Acanthus stega, and then the numerous more that we've come up since then, like Tiktaalik, Elpista stega, and all these other ones. But we didn't really get to. But it's something that I would like to, point out to him in the future, I think.
And the other aspect of his Tortuganosity, boom, bouncing off the mind shell, is that he would not own up to the initial mistake. His brain cannot conceptualize the idea that he was doing flunk out pseudo scholarship when he copied that source down without looking. The moment he did that, he was making the error, independent of what actual fossils exist and what Tiktaalik does or does not look like, or what the internal structure of the developmental biology of the tetrapod, manus and jaw structure, all of that, all of which is relevant information. But independent of that, he was effing up at that basic source method level. And that means he was off the reservation right there. To have a politically incorrect reference to our Native Americans.
Well, it wasn't even just that claim. Every single claim that he brought up was nicked secondarily.
Oh yeah.
It was either a regular trope, like the
or Kent Hovind,
carbon, like the soft tissue thing. Or exactly. Or it was something else where you could have easily looked up the information but just hadn't.
Yeah. And the older the material gets, the more pathetic it is, because I just absolutely roared with laughter when you had brought up, or he brought up the matter of the sun being as big as the Earth if it were billions of years old because of the hydrogen usage. And I knew exactly where he got this from. He nicked it from Kent Hovind. And so I would still love to know where he got it from Kent Hovind, because it was a claim he was making back in the 1990s, back before this kid he was not even a fetus yet. And so where did he get this from? If Kent Hovind, when he told me, when I challenged him on it back in the 1990s, I cover this incident in the Dynamania chapter at TIP. Hey, go look it up. I got it on my website, damn it. When I challenged him on it, he says, oh, I don't use that argument anymore. Well, either that's true and he stopped using it in the 1990s, so where the hell did Matt Powell hear about it? Or somebody relied on this old argument incorrectly and he relied on that, or Kent Hovind started reusing it again since 1990s and therefore is lying out of his teeth when he acknowledged that it was a bad argument back in the 1990s. Those are the only three options I can think of.
Magic. He reinvented the argument.
Yeah. And
No,
so that's why I would have wanted to have asked him where exactly he got this from, because this matters for method.
It seems that he's not even really good at quoting creationist material, because he had Matt talked with Russell Glasser, who's one of the hosts of the Atheist Experience, and they talked about Richard Dawkins' book, The Blind Watchmaker, which is a really good book.
Yeah, but also very old.
Right. It's also, and was it early 2000s, I think?
Oh no, Blind Watchmaker goes all the way back into, I think, the 70s. I mean, it's an old book.
His first book was in 76.
Oh, that was, yeah, I'm thinking of the Selfish Gene. But anyway, it's a ways back.
Right.
And,
so
it's not something that's secondary book.
They were talking about it, and Matt had claimed in the discussion that he had read it, and so Russell was like, I've also read it. But then when they started discussing it, Matt really couldn't seem to remember any of the stuff from the book.
And you want me to speculate here? What Matt thinks when he says he's read it, all he really means is he's read little snippets from it in his apologetic literature. And they can therefore confuse it to think, oh, I've read this book. You get the same thing regarding Stephen Jay Gould. They've seen a couple quotes from Gould somewhere, and that means they've read his material. No, they've only read little snippets of the material. And the same way, look at the number of people that think they know Darwin from a couple Darwin quotes, that they've never read the original material.
It's really funny.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because we did a talk a while back. It was during the school year, so it was several months ago, when on Street Preachers, and one of the women who had been there, who was there with this religious group I talked to, said she'd read about radiometric dating. And I said, oh, you've read about it, so you've read like all this data pertaining to it. And she's like, oh, well, no, not really.
Yeah, or when you quiz Matt about whether or not he ever dealt with secular websites and source material, and all he could come up with was some little secondary website, not technical literature, not PNAS, not science, not nature, but all of these things are directly accessible. So, there's no excuse for it. The idiot says Watchmaker was mid-1980s. He read it in high school. So, yeah, I knew it was quite a ways ago. And so it's still a thing that's 30 years old and is a secondary source. Excuse me, we've moved beyond it. As I've pointed out in other contexts, and I'll remind it, this is an important methods lesson. If you lived in 2004, the odds that you would be able to find most of the technical literature free online were low. But it's not 2004 anymore. It's 2018. And I know from my own work, being an impoverished scholar who couldn't afford to buy these damn things, I would often have to go to the local colleges and try to find some of these things. But a lot of it literally wasn't accessible because they didn't have the journals. None of the universities here are paleontology places. So they don't have an awful lot of the paleontology journals. But now, not only is stuff available for the students online electronically, as you know, Jackson, and Cap is going to discover as well, and is going into the college realm, but online, between ResearchGate and Academia EDU and professors' websites, and a lot of the journals relating to biological material tend to all be open access because they're well funded, so they don't have to depend on subscriptions. easily 80 to 90% of the technical literature that you will need to locate to see the primary source stuff is going to be available freely. And therefore, nobody has an excuse for relying on a secondary source, period. That's the take-home lesson. And I'll guarantee you that it's not that you have to read every bloody paper that comes down the road, but everybody watching this and will have areas of interest that they are interested in no matter what. And so you can home in on a particular topic field and become more versed in that. And then if you are connected up as we are in our loose networks, that somebody will know the primary source material, and all you need to do is to share that, and now everybody knows it in the network, and you've just improved your apologetic counter argument, now haven't you?
That's what I'm trying to do with the paleontology series. Is I'm trying to build up a whole series that you can lob any time at the claim that all the fossil tells you is that something died. That's the entire point of that series.
And I've learned stuff from you, as you well know. I'm constantly complaining about the fact that I have to do all this research to check your material. And I find all these new papers that I didn't have and I have to add them in. And then I find yet more material that connects up. And then I will throw them back at you saying, ooh, did you know about this? And did you know about that? And so suddenly we're operating at a better game than we were individually beforehand.
And RJ, it would be an understatement to say I've learned things from you.
Well, and there's so much data out there, yes. And it can be overwhelming to people to realize that just on systematics, on biology, on genetics, it's a mountain of stuff. I have almost 25,000 technical papers in my reference bibliography. And that's, I don't think, is anywhere near the whole relevant data field for evolution issues, but it's a big chunk. And the thing is that trying to get at some of that stuff, there's so many journals involved, I couldn't possibly have acquired all of that data field without everybody out there that I'm bumping into who are doing some of the legwork ahead of me, and then I can build off of them and cross-check and connect up in that way. That speeds up the process.
Like the shame issue. The evolutionary shame thing?
Oh, yeah, that was reminded to because somebody had brought it up. One of the Glenn guy, I think. Yeah, and he was obviously thought this terribly important. What's the evolutionary thing on shame? Well, I knew there was a lot on altruism and related issues there, but specifically shame, I didn't really have anything on, so I did a quick search. And before I finished watching the video, I'd actually found some really neat technical papers on the neuroscience of shame and also the sociobiology of how it functions in various cultures that were very recent works. They've only come out in the last few years that I didn't know about before, but was prodded to look it up and found the information readily and put links up in the video to it and added them to my bibliography. So now if anybody brings up the subject of shame, well, actually, there's some technical literature on that.
Indeed.
And it means that there's such a large area. One of the things that I'm trying to bring home to everybody on dealing with creationists, and the same issues apply to any oddball belief and to politics and to economics and everything else, because it's all the same method, is that you want to get solid material that's primary source based, not secondary accounting, that improves your understanding of the subject matter. If you're going to tackle creationists, you're going to have to deal with some specialized terminology, because once in a while, you're going to find a creationist that's going to throw jargon at you. And if you don't know the jargon, you are at a disadvantage. If you haven't read any of the technical literature directly, you are at a disadvantage. If they're going to play Gish Gallop on you, you're going to be at a disadvantage unless you've heard of the Gish Gallop before. You know their material better than they do. You've actually read more creationist material than they have. You've read more of the technical literature than they have. So now you can pick your ammunition to know just where to hit back. And no matter how fast they Gish Gallop, you can trip them up at more than one spot and do it with confidence because you have the primary material inculcated into you. You're not hunting around to see what Neil deGrasse Tyson or Richard Dawkins or somebody said about it. It's because you've got it internalized in you in the same way that you can tell how to get downtown from where you live because you're directly related to it. And that makes you a better arguer, frankly. Checking the live feed here to find out. I wish I knew the theme on that for the song. Yes, it's a shame the way they mess around with the facts. It's a shame the way they don't read. But that's kind of how they do it. one of the things for people to, oh, let me stop momentarily. I'll put my fabulously quick up here, and then we'll get back to the discussion. I got to put my screen share on. The old man doing his incredibly confusing, there we go, and get rid of the infinite regress. There we go. RJ tip patrons who have helped support the project: Stephen and Dyer and Eek and Yui and Mona and Hendril and Jen and Jody and Daniel and Ralph and Eric and Benjamin and Staggles, Alex Stone, Todd Israel, Everett and Paul. Thank you all. There's the website, there's the Patreon, there's the GoFundMe. I won't belabor the point because it's a thing that if people haven't heard about it by now, and if they're not going to help, they're not going to help. If they are going to help, they're going to help. And in fact, I've stopped blurbing about the GoFundMe on Twitter because it seems like banging my head against a wall. So it's a matter of you guys out there got to help. Even if you can't contribute anything else or contribute directly, you can help spread the word about it and say why it's important, what I'm doing, and why it's unique enough that it's worthy doing it. Maybe we can get more of that crowd. I just got number 170 person today that was apparently prodded into it by Pelagia, who recognizes what work I've done. And so he's got one person, friend, to help on that. Well, that's not a crowd. So let me tell you what I'm about. I began on this project many years ago before, in fact, the people, Jackson and Cap, were in diapers probably at that time. And it gradually developed to where I'm at now, which is I'm combating anti-evolutionism at a source methods level, which is looking at what they've done, what sources they've relied on, how they misrepresent them or not. A little bit of this has been done by other scholars before me. I'm not inventing the wheel fresh, but what I am doing it is at a speed and a depth that, pat my back, nobody is doing it at this level. If you might find a work like, just look at Dwayne Gish and his criticism of the reptile-mammal transition. Literally, the only people who ever brought it up were a few people back at the time in the 1980s when he was starting doing his work. All of his 1995 material, which was in a book form, nobody has mentioned any of that at all. That when I looked through my data field to see what had been covered and what hadn't, I discovered holes in our defense wall, and one of the big ones was the reptile-mammal transition. So I thought, uh-oh, I need some scratch myself. I need some money, so I need to write a standalone book, as I'd been recommended to do since the GoFundMe was going so bloody slow, and still is. And that's why I came up with Evolution Slam Dunk. And so here I've literally written the work that fills that hole, that covers comprehensively, literally every counter argument that anti-evolutionists have ever brought forth on that subject. And you get to see every single one of them fall apart right in front of you. And Christine Janis, the paleontologist, called it a tour de force, and she's a paleontologist. It's in her field. So I feel perfectly happy on that, but not everybody in the anti-creationism biz has my book, do they? Nope. Are they talking about it at higher levels? Nope. So a lot of people still need to jog everybody's memories and get things going. Plus the old RJ needs the damn royalties. So there's the plug for that. And Jackson, you've seen Evolution Slam Dunk. Is it a piece of crap, or is it an important contribution to the field, or somewhere in between?
I do think it's an important contribution to the field because you cover so many different creationists, so many different arguments, and I've learned. I know I certainly have benefited a lot from it. I think that on a fundamental level, the source methods approach has changed the way that I evaluate evidence.
It's a no-lose situation. Source methods ups your own game, both at the level of understanding the topic and also at your ability to respond on the topic. One thing that gets people tongue-tied in creation evolution debates is where they get into like a he said ping pong match over the reliability of some argument or some philosophical position. But everybody who follows me on Twitter should notice that although I also bring up data floor, I'm constantly bringing up the source methods issues. And the two questions they can't answer is where are you getting your sources from and how did you fact check them? Even if they've got sources, which is not all that common, oh, do they screw up on the fact checking part? And if we play this game, it's a game they can't play. So they curl up into a ball. They move off. And the more that we can get them off the playing field, because the playing field is source methods, that we're not going to be talking about philosophy. Yes, I have no problem with that. We're going to be talking about data floor, which is a big data field, and that's why you want to be familiar with it, as much of it as possible. And you can do it nowadays because it's so accessible. Mouse click, boop. And then, but underneath that is the source methods issue. And so, Diniz says, I'm not going to say who, but somebody got his copy of Slam Dunk this past Thursday. Well, I hope somebody will make a point of rating and reviewing it. And I hope somebody will also go to the point of telling everybody in your network about it. A live review if on Twitter or some context like that is actually kind of neat, saying, here I'm going through chapter, and so forth and so on. If you do videos, bring up that element there. If there's professors and other people that you think ought to know about it, call it to their attention. Can't do diddly squat. I'm still trying to scavenge around to get a full publisher for a second edition of the book, which would have illustrations. I got a big stack of material that would be added on to bring it up to this date, and to get the rights to all the different illustrations that I would like to use. And then it'll be full college level material, plus the old RJ can use some royalties off of that too. But in the meantime, we've got that. And all the work that I'm doing is stuff that theoretically eventually will be in the big tip website, if I can keep at it long enough to do that, and upgrade to make it more user-friendly and add on stuff. At the moment, I'm a one-man band here. I'm doing this all by myself. And I would love to have assistance. I'd love to have connections on it and to be able to have more of a professional kind of circumstance, but I got no money. So I'm down to spaghetti to see me through to my Social Security check here. That's why I've had the GoFundMe stuff. Anyway, we digress. I want to get to the other subject matter, which are the non-young Earth creationists in the field. I try to bring up stuff that's just landed on me during the course of tip research as I bounce into things, because I'm doing the research of the incoming material, and I'm also monitoring the anti-evolutionists. And you, Ross, who I had a chat with on Skype, but he's never put it up on his Skype listings. He's on his podcasts because apparently he didn't get anything useful from me. I was challenging him on too much. He is one of these that wants to rationalize the days of creation. As those of you who are familiar with Genesis Day 4, as the sun and the moon and the stars made after the earth and plants, which, spoiler alert, ain't true. So how do you get around it? This popped up in some of the old creationist contexts, where some would argue that the clouds during the vapor canopy before the flood were so incredibly dense that they couldn't really see that the sun and the moon and the stars were there until the clouds cleared, and haha, there they are. And that would be an example of misplaced concreteness, because God would know they're there. What was he relying on the requirements of what was going on down below? But it gets even worse if you're an old Earth creationist, because he's functionally talking about the skies clearing up maybe in the Cambrian or late Precambrian, which is a questionable argument. And I've been poking at him for quite some time on it. And it's also incredible misplaced concreteness, because nothing with eyeballs would have been there to see it. So what, were they bacteria terribly pushed out of shape because they didn't know about this? Why is God only bringing it up? No, the reason why he's going through this rigmarole is that he wants to somehow make the Genesis days match up with the observed science that we actually have. And it's just amazingly tendentious. So I linked to Ross's point, and Ross also linked to this other apologist from the Christian Post, who was basically parroting his position with no feedback or pushback, and also the original technical paper, so that you can see that. I actually emailed the author of the paper inquiring as to whether she agrees on this idea that the atmosphere would have been so hazy you wouldn't have been able to tell there was a sun and the moon there. And I haven't gotten any reply yet on it, but I can see no indication that just hazy smogginess is sufficient to wriggle around to the point of where it was only translucent, that you would literally not be able to see for one thing, the moon was way closer to the earth at this early stage in the thing. It would have been big. And the days had only been 18 hours long, 12 hours long in the initial parts. And so the situation is much, much different than what would be going on for the archaebacteria that would be observing this underneath the haze. Anyone want to comment on this weird issue?
I just did a video on the Cambrian. Aha.
Aha, yes. Were you terribly concerned about how hazy the clouds were at that time?
You know, interestingly, neither the sun nor the moon came up in either the first or the second part. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and it doesn't come up much in the most of the data field doesn't come up. One of the things I pointed out in Slam Dunk that I thought is really revealing is that nobody at Ross's Reasons to Believe has ever mentioned the reptile-mammal transition. Ever. Not one posting. Now, here is 100 million years worth of life, supposedly made by God, you know, all this wonderful stuff. You'd think curiosity for God's handiwork would at least come into play, but not even that. Poof, it's just off the scope. I thought that was very, very revealing. Benjamin Simpson, I will authority quote Benjamin Simpson there in the live chat. Evolution Slam Dunk is excellent. I've learned lots and have found references for my own research. Thank you very much, Benjamin. I can't recall whether you have put a review up at wherever you got it from, Amazon or whatever, but please do so if you have not. And let everyone know about it, because I'm the lowly little writer here who can definitely use all the buzz I can get. And I'd love it, you know, why shouldn't Bill Nye and Neil deGrasse Tyson and Jerry Coyne and Richard Dawkins and all the rest not know about this work? Why shouldn't they not have it on their shelves, et cetera, so forth and so on? Well, I can't let them know because I'm just the author, but you guys can let them know. So somebody knock on their door or send them an email and that, or trying to tell them about it. The worst you can do is be snubbed. But, geesh.
You know, RG, it's almost like there's 90% of the data field that creationists don't bother looking at. But anyway, I mean,
yeah, that's relevant to David Lass's point. Yeah, do Tortukans know enough about the data field for curiosity to manifest in the first place?
When I did my video on index fossils, and I mean, really, a lot of the videos I've done on paleontology bump into index fossils because of how ubiquitous they are in paleontology. But looking through all, like three or four of the major anti-evolutionist sources, only one of them actually had a page on it. Didn't discuss a single, a single type of index fossil. They just kind of droned on about stasis.
And that's one of the things that I'm measuring, and thanks to all the connections that I'm making, I learned a lot off of your index fossil piece. That was neat. I had a lot of stuff and added some other material in that as well, because some of it related to material that was talking about biogeographical paleoclimates and all of that, which is also a problem for young Earth creationists to deal with. But the thing is that now that all of that gets into my tip bibliography reference, I can measure that against their reference base. And remember, I'm literally measuring this bit by bit, source by source. It takes a lot of effort to go through. I have, for all practical purposes, most of the intelligent design data field plugged into my thing because I follow them and I've been following them in great depth. I've got most of the current young Earth creationist material, but some of the older material, I've got masses of fire hazard printouts of the creationist journals going back into the 1980s that eventually and 70s, and I'm going to be processing in due course if I live long enough and can afford to buy ink and a few other things. Thank you, please. But the thing is that that's an awful lot of that is going to be repetitive material. As we know, Andrew Snelling is very repetitive. He cites the same stuff over and over again. So there's an awful lot of copying there. At the moment, there's only a bit over around 3,500 technical papers that have been cited by over 2,000 anti-evolutionists with over 8,000 of their sources. So that's the whole sweep. That includes young Earth creationist cosmology stuff and geology, as well as the biology and paleontology and systematic stuff. Only about 3,000 some odd papers. Now, I've got my data field of 24,000 technical papers, and I don't for a moment think that that's the whole biz, but it's a good chunk. So right off the bat, they're only bumping into 15% of my data field, but a lot of their stuff, as Ruby and Sanford demonstrate, is authority quoting, not or dated material or secondarily cited. So my rough heuristic is anti-evolutionists are missing 90% of the data field. I'm not guessing, I'm measuring. So everybody that wants to recognize that this is another measurement, nobody's ever done this before. Nobody's been in a position to do it before. I've shown a few people occasionally the thing I don't post up at the website, which is my spreadsheet, and it goes on and on. I've never printed it out because it's got so many entries in it. It would be thousands of pages and all that. It would be mess to try to do. But it's done purely electronically. But there I am physically measuring all of that. So I can tell when creationists pop up, I've found this a lot on Twitter and in other exchanges where they'll throw a technical paper at me. They're sounding illiterate, aren't they? They're citing a science paper. And I look over in my bibliography, and there it is. It's in my bibliography, and it's got a little black box next to it. That means it's been cited by an anti-evolutionist. They've nicked it somewhere. They haven't read this originally. They've culled it from an anti-evolution site. What are the odds that somebody just at random would find a technical paper that had conveniently been cited by anti-evolutionists? No, this is a way of countering and measuring their frames in a way that you wouldn't do if in any other context. Another thing I point out to people, you pick my brain. Everybody on Twitter, anyone who wants to bring up questions at the main tip website, do so. I'm there. Those of you who donated and things, I've given you my email address. You can share that around to people and that, so they can contact me directly, and let's pick our brains. In effect, that's what Jackson and I do when he does a video and he sends me the script to look at, and I'm going through that and vetting it and checking my own base and bringing him new material in response. I do the same thing with Pelagia and all that, and we all get better because of that. So there it is. But anyway, that bit about why the TIP project is something that if everybody were doing it, I wouldn't say that it was unique. But I'm the one doing this. The NCSE isn't doing it. Nobody in this field is doing that. Hi, Crocosquirrel.
Yeah, I'm a little late, but better late than never most times.
Yeah, had you been watching the show earlier, or do we need to give you a recap?
A quick recap would be absolutely lovely. Thank you.
Okay, I gave a further land-based. We said bye-bye to the Hobbit. And you should make sure we don't get feedback. I said bye-bye to the Hobbit part of the Ruby and Sanford book, where they're just reprising their bloody argument that the Hobbits are just a form of Homo erectus, which is for them another version of human beings, and so they're misrepresenting the source material there. Then I brought up Hugh Ross, who's still banging this argument that the day 4 Earth, sun, moon, and stars being made after the Earth and plants wasn't really that. It's they became visible as the Earth's atmosphere became transparent enough because of the rise of oxygen breaking down this alleged impenetrable translucent haze. And he's just been grasping at straws on this point.
Well, he can continue grasping at straws because there's a few things he doesn't seem to recall. Number one, photosynthesis requires sunlight to even operate, which means the sun at very minimum would have been visible to the blue-green algae that kicked all the oxygen into the atmosphere.
Yeah, even with smog, even when I lived in smoggy California, you could still tell there was a sun up there, and you would also know there was a moon. The stars may be harder to see, but you know the little archaebacteria didn't have to worry about telescopes to view Sirius. They would be able to know there was a sun there.
Well, here it is even worse. Our atmosphere is some 70% nitrogen, 20-some% oxygen, and a smattering of other things. At the moment, the oxygen percentage has been higher in the past,
and
as evidenced by and much lower. At that time, the amount of oxygen was much lower. We had way more carbon dioxide. When we're talking about way back in the day.
Yeah. Anyway, that new paper.
But the fun part of this is that just about all of those gases, very nearly all of those gases, I think there might be one or two otherwise, are transparent to photons.
Yeah. So all the argument that Ross is attempting to make is that the organic haze that is being argued that was being produced very early in the Earth's history is sufficiently dense that it makes the sun and the moon and the stars functionally invisible. And that's the part of the gangplank that he's jumping off of. And I'm trying to verify. Anyway, now let's get to the third act in the show, and that's Denise O'Leary. Oh, Denise O'Leary. She's a Canadian intelligent design advocate who mainly is running the Uncommon Descent website that Bill Dembski set up. So an awful lot of the posts, even the ones that are not under her name, are actually Denise O'Leary posts. She is just one of the grand masters of the rambling secondary citation spew. Typically, she'll link to just sometimes dozens of different website linkages. Very rarely do they ever refer to primary sources. Anyway, she had a kind of specific one, a couple of them that just piqued my curiosity. One of them was on a really quite interesting article in the New Scientist on LUCA, the last universal common ancestor, and the things we can tell about what it was and things we can't. And therefore, he was arguing that because of some of the things we can't, a lot of the speculation on its nature is still very speculative, and we should kind of tone off on that until we can find more data to deal with. Well, she homes in on the question marks, but she ignores all of this references to what we've worked out. So I strongly recommend linking to, I put the link in there. You can just go to his piece, and it's got all the different linkages in it to this really big pile up of wonderful technical literature, and follow up on that.
There was I think Bill Martin is one of the guys who has been working on what LUCA looked like and did. A lot of the and what I've read is a lot of the research has been muddled because of horizontal gene transfer.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, that's it makes it hard to identify from existing organisms, because every organism on the planet is several billions of years removed from LUCA. Many, about 3.5, 4 billion. Because and as I pointed out in the stuff that I've done earlier on Origins Live Questions, I don't think anybody can argue that the initial replicator organism is LUCA. LUCA is actually far down the road. It's the one that is the one that all existing organisms have drawn off of. And we may have to put you on a mute there, Krakow, so long as you have the bumptious child.
No. That one's over.
Sweet child. Kids will be kids. You know, I was a kid once. I know that may be hard to believe, but
no. I'm completely okay with believing that. George W. Bush was a kid too.
Yeah, okay. They all were.
Anyway,
on LUCA.
Horizontal gene transfer would make finding the actual LUCA almost impossible.
Yeah,
and on top of
is how much of a pre-LUCA biology isn't reflected in the LUCA thing, that there's maybe just tiny little fragments that are in structures of stuff. And so it's very, very difficult. And at the moment, we're at a data field that can only go back so far based upon the limited sampling of existing organisms to work with. If we had like living Ediacara, for example, I bet that would tussle up stuff a great deal. But because of all of the things that he did, if we didn't already have all of those references in his paper to tell you what we had worked out, and that's why I recommend actually going to it. The other one that Denise linked to was one on zebrafish eyes, and zebrafish have wonderful vision, that they're adapted. They got like a very wide angle view of the world. They're very good at sensing a lot of stuff, and of course that was an immediate gee whiz, isn't life fabulously complicated, ergo design. But there again,
if I may.
If you read the paper, they go into a lot of the issues about the evolutionary context of these things. And so it's yet another opening. So that's another one, because it was open access. I go, heck, read it on your own and find out her spin versus the article that she's riffing off secondhand. She didn't even cite the original article. She cited a commentary on the original article, and that's pure Denise O'Leary. She didn't even bother to read the original article. Yeah. Oh, she's a fascinating piece of work. She's one of those that's she technically is listed as I keep a column in my tip work about people who have actually cited primary source material, but they may have cited it secondarily. And so a source will be given a different category if it's one that has only been cited secondarily by somebody. And there's quite a lot of chunks of stuff that's been cited by anti-evolutionists, but only because she cited it secondarily. And often she just doesn't pay attention even to the content of her secondary account that mentions relevant information. So I've been making a point of checking all this stuff out, and I've learned so much that theoretically could have fallen under Denise's eyeballs. And worse is that we don't know what it is she thinks accounts for the data. It's always a negative. Oh, you Darwinists, you're making exaggerations. Or, oh, you nasty Darwinists, how dare you? Or you haven't explicitly described the origin of a particular thing, and therefore you're at fault. Well, what's her explanation? What's her intelligent design explanation? Does she claim it was, any of it was designed? We never get to that stage. So it's a giant god of the gaps.
I find kind of the
well,
same.
here's the fun part. If I
Jackson
may
was speaking.
quick.
Oh, okay. Get it out of the way quick.
All right. So the other thing, here's the other thing. If Denise wanted to make this look good, she could have taken any herbivore rather than specifically refer to zebrafish and expose the original source. She could have taken any herbivore or any other critter with eyes the size of its head. She didn't need a fish. She could have used a rabbit or a cow.
Well, but she's
and it
not
would have
interested
been
in
just
knowing
it would have been just
anything
as good.
about it other than that it's a gee whiz. I call this the gee whiz category. That it's a sidebar on the natural theology argument.
That just makes her an unstudied idiot.
Well, but that's Diniz-Filho. Now, Jackson, please make it.
I was thinking, it kind of reminds me of the like Nature, or not Nature, Science, the non-technical articles, and they do the commentary sort of things on like a paper, and because I'll get it by a mailing list, and so I'll go to the article, and then I'll hope that they have the original linked, but instead of linking the original, they'll link another commentary piece. And so you have to go through like 2 commentary pieces to actually get to the original article. Oh,
yeah, and you get a lot of, at the Discovery Institute in particular, there's an enormous amount of secondary redaction. So you get a commentary and a link to a paper, but it's actually a link to another Discovery Institute commentary, which may be linking to another Discovery Institute in a long daisy chain.
That's pretty much what they're doing in the Answers book. Most of their citations, as far as I've seen so far, are just here's what someone already wrote at Answers in Genesis, and and it's like
and that's why I'm wanting to measure literally what's been discussed and who cites what, so I don't have to guess at it. When you reach the stage where you've got thousands and thousands and thousands of technical papers and issues, I have them broken down into a variety of categories. I'll put all of the basic biological one under one category. There's a separate category for biogeography and speciation, 2 separate categories for those, because those are really fascinating omissions. Then a section on paleontology, a whole section on origin of life and cosmological issues. And I include stuff in the origin of life category that others might not. Everything related to error correction systems in the genome, into how the ribosome functions, as to why codon assignments are the way they are, and whether there's certain preferential elements, the role of whether or not viruses existed very early or not. Those are all origins of life questions that I put into that field. And then there's stuff on human evolution, and then another one on cognitive neuroscience issue. That's an area that's like crickets for anti-evolutionists. Boy, do they not talk about that one. And so I don't have to guess at how much data they're missing. Most of the stuff is related to the big ticket items, which would be biological subjects and a certain amount of paleontology. But even there, the paleontology stuff is so surprisingly thin, and the same things get trotted out over and over and over again. That you can realize that the question that came up earlier in the live feed there about the primary source data field and why they don't deal with it. There seems to be a genuine absence of curiosity in the Tortugan mind. They may think they're curious and they may think they do research, but they don't really got the bug. And also that in earlier ages, it would have been easy for them to be let off the hook in the fact that it would have been hard to find primary source material. I knew this in my own research. And so I pointed out in Slam Dunk how Krieger, who did that idiot thing at the Creation Ministries, Creation Wiki, on the Hunt evolution sequence of the reptile mammal thing, that it would have been very difficult for him in 2003 or even in 2008 to have found some of the primary source technical literature. But that's not the case in 2018. And so we can track down stuff at a much greater level, and their absence of doing that is a further measure of their bad method, because they're not ultimately curious about what the data are. You'd want to know what the data are. Fine, then, if you want to bring out an intelligent design argument, if you want to present a creationism position, do it. Go ahead. But do it with all the data. You've got to account for the data. You have to grapple with it all. You have to explain why these organisms existed, when and where they were.
Okay,
Challenge the geologic system. Yeah, you got to.
I shall mute.
Yes, you shall mute. You're getting animals and stuff running all over the place. Dogs and cats living together. It's the end of the world.
That was a good reference, RJ.
Yeah, but so this is
Actually,
where
it's my sister-in-law's dogs.
I know you get that
In-laws.
thing. Oh, like whenever my niece's sweet little pups, when I'm visiting her place, and when they're watching a show on television, high definition, and there's a dog on there or an animal, they just go berserk. And so they're protecting the house from the invader. It's just absolutely sweet. Anyway, then, so this, I hope what this is reinforcing, everybody, since we're about at the end of the hour, is that source matters methods matter. This is a critical thing. It's a core methodological process. It literally measures the difference between people who suffer from cranial blockage of the rectum and people who don't. And it has nothing to do with intellect. It has nothing to do with politics or religion, although it manifests at that in many ways. It has to do with people who have a mind that can easily take a secondary source as if it were a primary source. There's no stopping them. And you're going to find them all over the place, but you do find them in any group that believes something that's not true. That you scratch the method surface of anything, whether it's young earth creationists or flat earthers or anti-vaxxers or Holocaust deniers or moon landing hoax people or everybody but Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare's plays, any of those, and exactly the same method is applied. But it just happens to have a different set of content. And they can be very bright people. They can be dull as a sack of hammers. We've met all of those. There's a whole range. But the method is everything. And the more we connect together to use rigorous method and to demand others use rigorous method and to make it a social stigma not to where it's not acceptable in an argument. There was a thing on climate change debate, just I think last year, where a New Jersey politician who was a climate change skeptic was being interviewed by Chris Cuomo. I think I may have mentioned it in an earlier video. And it struck me as so characteristic of why source methods matters. And so he brings up that there's all this scientific evidence against climate change. And instead of a source methods question, where Cuomo would have said, oh, really? According to whom? And how did you check it? Basic questions. Instead of that, he said, well, how do you deal with the consensus? Now he's pulled away from his source base, and now he's talking a political cultural phenomenon, and now he's just switched the subject where he shouldn't have. It's not that consensus doesn't exist, and that's a legitimate issue, but that's above the data floor, not at source methods. And so they went off on digressions and all that. So reporters need to be versed better in it, as well as lay people, and politicians should be held to account for it. I would love to see a day, I'm not expecting to live to see it, but I'd love to see a day where nobody could be running for public office without having to pass vetting muster at a source methods level. And so if anybody, a basic question would be asked, no offense, but how old do you think the Earth is? And if they say 6,000 years old, then Tortugan alert's flashing, and that person is methodologically challenged by definition for the same reason that if they thought the Earth was flat, although you're much more likely to find a young Earth creationist, Ben Carson, the vice president, a few others like that are knocking around in that, Governor Huckabee, ex-Governor Huckabee, definitely a young Earth creationist. Whether or not his daughter Sarah is a young Earth creationist or not, nobody asks. I think methods questions matter. So there's the soapbox about why this is not trivial and why it could have an effect. Jump in, Jackson.
as far as the politicians go, they usually don't comment, as far as I've seen, on the issue other than to say something like, as Bobby Jindal said, "Oh, there's good science on both sides." Well, then Carson went ahead and was like, "Let me give a whole lecture on young Earth creationism." So,
yeah, and here's the difficulty. Even NCSE isn't really hot on source methods approach, as they should be. And so too also reporters. That routinely there are legislation put in various state houses on various anti-evolution issues. And almost never can you find out from the coverage, either at the original newspaper or television level, or the linkages that are put through with NCSE, National Center for Science Education, where they fall on the spectrum of intelligent design, old Earth creationism, or young Earth creationism, because nobody bothers to ask. Once in a while, you can find end runs. There was a case where one of the interviewers happened to notice some of the books on the guy's shelf, and one of them was a Dwayne Gish book. Bingo, ding, 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 ding. That's a young Earth creationist book. Now we've got something to light ourselves into on a source methods level. But this doesn't happen nearly often enough, that they'll just ask, what's your view on evolution? Not what are the sources you have used to come to believe as you do on evolution. Now you can look at that at a different level. So I'm trying to get more people involved in this approach. Brian Stevens points out, it says, 22 scientists working in climatology, and the consensus among them is climate change is real. We're affecting it into some scary ass shit. Yeah. And that's another one where NCSE and I both independently started kind of paying attention to this issue, because for me, from a methods direction, I was noticing that the vast majority of anti-evolutionists are also climate change deniers. And this is because of the demographic they come from, where anti-evolutionism comes from a kind of a general hyper-conservative, pro-business, those nasty environmentalists want to take away our automobiles or something. That was the frame that goes all the way back to Jerry Falwell's era. So I began to think, well, maybe I need to look at what they're dealing on, how this impacts with climate change. Because the same, if you look at Senator Imhoff, who's a climate change skeptic, he's functionally a creationist, anti-evolutionist, and methodologically, he's hitting all the marks. Over-reliance on secondary sources that he doesn't fact-check, limited data field, never thinking through what he thinks happened with the data, and never having criteria for changing their mind. He's hitting all four methods failures. And so that affects it, because these people are making policy for people. And so even if evolution or even climate change doesn't come up as an issue, if somebody is in a position of power as a department head in the government now, and they're making decisions based on what they want to be true, the object of desire, they're only paying attention to the secondary sources that they agree with, it's affecting people's lives. So this method stuff matters. It's core and fundamental. And the more we get onto it, the more we interconnect with people on it, the more we require all of our various venues and newspaper media and television and bloggers and interest groups to make use of this, and that they need to pass muster at that level as well. And we all do. We will be better citizens. We will be better reasoners. We'll be better arguers and defenders of truth. We'll be able to tell easier truth from non-truth. It's a no-lose situation as far as I can see. So there we are, a little bit past the hour. Anybody want to put in some 2 cents worth before I shut down for the night?
I am Jackson.
Yes, you are Jackson. I am Root.
I am the Lord of
Groot.
I am the Lord of the Crocus Pearls, an evolutionary impossibility. Don't
And
think
Cat
for a
Man-
moment. Trust me, the image you see down there, it's photoshopped.
So what happened to Cap? We haven't heard from him in a while.
Somebody
He may have
photoshopped it
dozed
back
off.
on
He often has. He's been
Um,
doing a long stint on various websites and stuff, and so he may have dozed away. So we will presume that's a possibility with him, because he hasn't had a peep and he's not muted. So to be that quiet and not muted suggests that perhaps he has dozed off. So hi, Bootcap. Anyway, so there's the situation there. We've got a bunch of links. I try to put stuff up on there. I welcome feedback. Anybody who's been following the videos and looks down in the commentary section will see that C. Brown, who is a creationist and who did not come today, I didn't see him anywhere in the thing. So he's saying, well, why don't you give me a link? Well, show up, and maybe we can see that. But that didn't happen. You can follow on there. I don't like to remove anybody from any of the discussions on there, precisely because I want everybody to display their method. Everybody displays their source methods, whether they know it or not, by how they discuss, what they bring up, what they don't, how they defend arguments and how they don't. And I'm hoping that in our troubled times, more of us will get our act together and follow source methods approach. So there we are. And that will be the show for this week. And I've got a bunch of links. Anybody who feels the bee in their bonnet to get slam dunked, they can click on the Amazon link and get a hold of it. And if you like fiction, you can get my Phileas Fogg Paralogues of Fog novel too, because it's a ripping good yarn, and I need the royalties on that too. So anyway, thank you all, gang. We are stopping the broadcast, and we hopefully will see you next week, unless I am struck by lightning.
Sorry.